Morning breaks, and the world begins its daily performance. The hum of traffic, the glow of screens, the rhythm of obligation. Someone wakes, gets dressed, smiles into the mirror, and feels nothing. On the surface, everything looks right. The apartment is clean, the schedule full, progress measurable. But behind the eyes, there's a silence words can't touch, a quiet misalignment between motion and meaning. It isn't sadness, it isn't boredom, it's the uneasy sense that life is moving forward without you truly in it. You keep doing what you were taught to do, chasing goals, collecting achievements, staying productive, because stopping feels dangerous. Pausing might force you to hear what hides beneath the noise, so you fill the space with more, another task, another conversation, another bright screen. Yet at night, when the world softens and the distractions fade, that whisper returns, the same question you've avoided for years. Is this really my life? Most people carry that question in silence. They convince themselves they're just tired, that the emptiness will fade after the next success, the next trip, the next milestone. But it doesn't. It lingers, because what's missing isn't pleasure or comfort, it's alignment. Somewhere along the way, the inner compass stopped working. The needle spins, but it no longer points home. Modern culture rewards the mask. We learn to sound confident even when we're lost, to smile while we're unraveling, to share carefully edited pieces of our lives while our truth hides in the shadows. We call it progress, but it's performance, and performance without purpose quietly drains the soul. The result is a generation that looks accomplished, yet feels hollow. People who seem successful, but can't shake the sense of disconnection, as if their existence is only an imitation of itself. Maybe you felt it too, that strange fatigue that sleep can't fix, that subtle boredom in moments that should be fulfilling. You achieve, you distract, but the weight stays. Beneath all the noise, something ancient inside you keeps asking for direction. What if that something is real? Psychology once treated this restlessness as a symptom. But Carl Jung, one of the great explorers of the human psyche, saw it as a signal. He believed every person is born with an internal design, an invisible architecture that knows the way toward meaning. He called it the map of the soul, a guide written not in ink, but in dreams, instincts, and the quiet pull of authenticity. Jung wasn't talking about religion or philosophy, but about human nature itself. He spent his life studying the depths of the unconscious, our fears, our desires, the archetypal stories that repeat in every culture and every heart. Through that work he uncovered a truth that still feels radical. We don't suffer because we're broken, we suffer because we live against our own blueprint. We follow paths drawn by family, culture, and expectation, while the true map, the one meant only for us, lies buried beneath the noise. And maybe that's why you feel lost even when life appears complete, because you've been walking according to someone else's coordinates. You've been told what success should look like, how happiness should feel, which dreams are worth pursuing, yet none of those directions lead to the place your soul recognizes as home. Every human being carries that map, though few ever learn to read it. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It speaks through restlessness, through longing, through the faint ache that says, this isn't it. To ignore it is to drift endlessly, busy, functional, and unfulfilled. To follow it is to begin the only journey that truly matters, the journey back to yourself. So before you plan the next move, pause for a moment, listen beneath the static. The map is still there, waiting, and maybe the reason you feel lost is because you've been following someone else's. Imagine your mind as a vast house. From the moment you're born, you start living in one small, well-lit room. The part you can see, arrange, and decorate. You memorize its layout, call it reality, and convince yourself that's all there is. But beneath that tidy space stretch endless corridors, locked doors, and hidden staircases. You sense them sometimes, through dreams, déjà vu, or that strange pull of memories that don't belong to your present life. Those are the echoes from the deeper floors of the psyche. The room you know best is ruled by the ego, the conscious I that keeps the lights on and the schedule running. It's the storyteller that says, this is who I am. The ego organizes, plans, and maintains control. It's essential. Without it, the house would fall into chaos. But it mistakes its limited view for the whole. It believes it owns the building when, in truth, it only rents a single floor. Beneath the ego lies the personal unconscious, a vast basement of experiences you've forgotten or buried. Old shame, rejected desires, the failures you never talk about. They don't disappear, they wait. They influence choices quietly, shaping how you love, react, and repeat. Ever wonder why the same conflict keeps returning? Why certain people trigger you instantly? That's the basement, leaking through the floorboards. Go deeper still, and the atmosphere changes. The air feels heavier, the walls seem older, humming with something ancient. Here lives the collective unconscious, the shared foundation of every human mind. Within it dwell universal patterns, the archetypes that appear in every story humanity has ever told. The hero who leaves home, the mother who nurtures and consumes, the child who begins again, the wise old one who guides through paradox. These aren't invented ideas, they're psychological instincts, forces of imagination that existed long before language. They shape our dreams, our myths, and the quiet dramas of everyday life. Moving through these layers, you start to see that the psyche isn't random, it's architectural. Each level has its own structure, its own inhabitants. Among them are 4 that determine how you move through the world. First, the persona, the social mask. It's the suit you wear to survive in public. You adjust it to fit the crowd. Competent at work, charming among friends, agreeable at home. The persona is useful. It protects what's vulnerable, but live inside it too long, and it starts to replace your skin. You begin believing you are the role. In the shadows behind it stands the shadow, the collection of everything you deny or despise. Anger, jealousy, insecurity, desire, but also creativity, boldness and passion, traits exiled because they once felt unsafe. The shadow is the mirror you avoid. Ignore it, and it finds other ways to speak, through sudden rage, irrational fear, or projection onto others. Every person you can't stand often carries a piece of yourself you refuse to see. Then come the twin figures, Jung called anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine principles that exist in every psyche, no matter the gender. The anima softens men toward emotion and intuition. The animus grounds women in logic and direction. When denied, they twist it into extremes, rigid masculinity, emotional volatility, dependence disguised as love. When embraced, they balance each other, turning relationships into mirrors instead of battlegrounds. And finally, at the silent core of it all lies the self, not the ego that manages life, but the organizing center that gives it meaning. The self is the architect of the entire structure. It holds the blueprint of who you're meant to become. It calls you toward wholeness, not perfection, toward the integration of every flaw, every locked room. When you drift too far from this center, anxiety grows. When you move closer, life begins to feel coherent again. If you could step back and see your inner house from above, you'd notice how little space the ego actually occupies compared to the rest. Yet most of us spend our entire lives in that narrow room, decorating it, defending it, pretending it's the whole universe. We forget there are deeper rooms filled with wisdom and memory, waiting to be explored. Maybe the journey isn't about building more, but remembering what's already there. Because the tragedy of modern life isn't that the house is too small, it's that we never leave the hallway. Most of us live locked inside one bright room of our own mind, never meeting the one who built it. We live in an age that never stops talking. A constant flood of messages, opinions, and notifications fills every quiet corner of the day. Yet in this world of endless communication, most people can't hear themselves anymore. The noise outside has grown so loud that the voice within has almost vanished. It starts early. Childhood teaches us the first rule of belonging. Fit in. Don't cry too loudly. Don't be too different. Don't make anyone uncomfortable. Approval becomes the oxygen we breathe. We learn to trade honesty for acceptance, emotion for performance. Little by little, the raw, curious child disappears behind what looks like maturity. By the time we reach adulthood, the mask is complete. We call it personality, but it's really armor. The need to please, the fear of judgment, the addiction to achievement, these become the walls protecting that hidden child inside. The persona grows stronger, the self grows quieter, and soon the performance replaces the person. Modern life rewards this disguise. You're praised for efficiency, admired for composure, envied for success. But beneath the applause, a strange emptiness grows. Something inside you knows it's being neglected. Jung believed that when the soul is ignored, it doesn't disappear, it resists. It begins to send messages in the only language it knows: emotion, exhaustion, and dreams. Anxiety is often the first whisper. It creeps in without reason, like static interrupting a signal. You can manage it with distractions or medication for a while, but it always returns because anxiety isn't the disease, it's the symptom. Depression comes next, not as weakness, but as the psyche's desperate attempt to slow you down, to make you listen. When the soul is starved, energy fades. The body begins to speak the words that the mind refuses to hear. Then come the patterns, the same relationships that hurt, the same mistakes repeated with different faces. You promise yourself you'll change, but you don't. You can't, because something deeper keeps steering the wheel. Jung called these inner forces complexes, fragments of unhealed emotion that hijack your choices. They pull you into déjà vu, into emotional loops that feel like fate. But they're not fate. They're unintegrated parts of you, asking for attention. And when even those signs fail to reach you, the unconscious grows louder. It enters your dreams, painting stories you can't control: chases, falls, locked doors, abandoned houses. Every symbol becomes a message. The collapsing building isn't random. It's your false identity breaking down. The endless hallway isn't imagination. It's the search for a door back to yourself. These signals might terrify you, but they're not meant to. They're guides disguised as discomfort. The soul rarely speaks in comfort. It speaks in crisis. The more you resist, the more intense its language becomes. First, it whispers through unease. Then it murmurs through sadness. If you still ignore it, it screams through breakdowns, heartbreaks, and losses. Every event that shatters your control is the psyche's way of saying, "Wake up, this isn't who you are." The tragedy is that our culture treats these calls as personal failure. We medicate the signals, label them disorders, and rush back into the same noise that caused them. But what if the pain isn't punishment? What if it's navigation? Jung saw suffering not as an enemy, but as an initiation, a forced confrontation with truth. The wound, he said, is the place where light enters. Look closely, and you'll see that pain always carries direction. The job loss that strips your identity, the breakup that exposes your loneliness, the burnout that forces you to stop pretending. These aren't random misfortunes, they're messages from the self, the deeper intelligence within you, trying to pull you back to center. When you respond, life begins to rearrange, the noise softens, the mask starts to crack, and what's left beneath isn't weakness, it's reality, raw, unfiltered, alive. That's the first step toward healing, realizing that your suffering has a purpose, because the soul doesn't punish, it remembers. It remembers what you've forgotten, who you were before the noise, and until you turn around and listen, it will keep trying to call you home. You can't climb out until you're willing to descend. That's the paradox of healing. Everyone wants to rise out of pain, out of confusion, out of the darkness, but few are willing to go down first, into the silence where truth waits. Descent is frightening. It means stepping into the unknown parts of yourself, the ones you've spent years avoiding. Carl Jung called this inner journey individuation, the process of returning to wholeness by integrating every hidden piece of the psyche. It's not about becoming better, stronger, or newer. It's about becoming whole. Individuation begins when you stop running from yourself, when you finally turn toward the shadow, not as an enemy, but as a guide that knows the way home. To find that path, Jung left us a set of tools, not formulas or self-help steps, but ways to listen to the deeper layers of being. They're invitations to speak with the unconscious, to let the soul express itself in its own language again. The first is dream work, learning to interpret the symbolic messages that rise from beneath consciousness each night. Dreams aren't random, they're letters written by the self in images instead of words. A collapsing bridge might reveal a belief that can no longer support you. A locked room might point to a part of you that's ready to return. The goal isn't to decode them like puzzles, but to feel what they're showing. Dreams are mirrors of the soul, reflecting what the waking mind refuses to see. The second is active imagination, a conversation between the conscious mind and the figures that live within. It's the act of sitting quietly, closing your eyes, and allowing an image to unfold, a landscape, a face, a voice. You don't control it, you observe it, you ask questions, you listen. This was Jung's bridge between psychology and art, between science and spirit. It turns the unconscious from a dark ocean into a dialogue. Then comes shadow work, perhaps the hardest of all. It means facing the parts of yourself you were taught to reject, the anger, the envy, the need for control, but also the buried confidence, the wild creativity, the forgotten strength. Everything you suppress gains power in the dark. When you bring it into the light, that power returns to you. You stop being haunted by what you hide and start reclaiming what you lost. Next is deconstructing the persona, the painful peeling away of the masks you've worn to belong. The reliable worker, the agreeable friend, the flawless achiever. These roles once protected you, but now they confine you. Letting them go can feel like death because in a way it is. The death of false certainty. But beneath that collapse lies something real, the first breath of authenticity. Integration continues, with balancing the inner polarities. Jung called the anima and animus. These aren't genders but energies. The animus softens logic with emotion. The animus gives feeling direction. When denied, they distort relationships, leading us to project what we lack onto others. But when they unite, they harmonize the psyche. Love becomes less about possession and more about reflection. Relationships deepen, not because someone completes you, but because you finally meet yourself within. And then there's the oldest medicine of all, silence and solitude. In a world addicted to speed, quiet is rebellion. Jung believed the self speaks most clearly in stillness. Sitting alone without distraction means facing the vastness within, the fear, the longing, the forgotten voice. It's uncomfortable at first, but over time, silence becomes sanctuary. The mind stops shouting, and the whisper of intuition becomes audible again. These practices aren't escapes from the world. They're ways to re-enter it with clarity. They don't make life easier, they make it truer. The goal isn't to reach some enlightened version of yourself, but to return to the person you were before you learned to hide. You don't find the self by searching outward. You remember it by coming home. And when you do, you realize that the map you were searching for was never written on paper. It lives in the pulse between thought and feeling, in the dream that repeats until you listen, in the quiet knowing that says, this way. The descent isn't the end of the journey, it's the beginning of direction, because only when you dare to go down do you finally start to rise again. Imagine a broken mirror lying on the floor. Its fragments catch the light from different angles, sharp, scattered, incomplete. Then slowly, as if drawn by an invisible force, those pieces begin to slide together, edges align, reflections merge. What was shattered starts to reveal a single image again. That's what integration feels like. It's not about polishing the glass or erasing the cracks. It's about realizing the cracks were never flaws, they were the path. Healing isn't a quest for purity or perfection, it's a return to wholeness. To integrate is to accept everything that exists within you, the calm and the chaos, the shadow and the light, and to understand that both belong. Most people think healing means becoming someone new. Jung discovered the opposite. The goal of individuation, he said, isn't transformation into something else, but the revelation of what you've always been. The self isn't built, it's remembered. It waits behind the noise, behind the masks, behind the years of pretending. Integration is simply the act of turning toward it. For most of your life, you've been trained to choose sides, good over bad, strength over weakness, confidence over doubt. But the psyche doesn't work like that. Every trait has a twin. Courage is born beside fear. Compassion grows beside anger. Light becomes visible only through darkness. Reject one side and you cripple the other. The self doesn't divide, it harmonizes. Real healing begins when you stop fighting your contradictions, when you can sit in silence with both your mistakes and your wisdom without labeling either as wrong. The inner war begins to end. Awareness replaces judgment. You start to see that everything you condemned in yourself was only a misunderstood attempt to protect you. As this awareness deepens, projection dissolves. The people who once irritated you become mirrors instead of enemies. You stop trying to fix them because you finally recognize them as reflections of what you haven't yet accepted within yourself. When anxiety loosens its grip, not because it disappears, but because it no longer needs to shout for your attention. Relationships grow quieter, deeper, more real. You listen more, you defend less. Life starts to feel coherent again, not because it's perfect, but because it finally makes sense. Individuation doesn't make you invincible, it makes you transparent. You still feel pain, but it no longer defines you. You still fall, but the fall no longer means failure. It becomes dialogue. Instead of asking, why me? You begin to ask, what is this showing me? Life stops feeling like a series of punishments and becomes a conversation between consciousness and the unknown. The person who once searched for meaning begins to live it. Work becomes expression, not obligation. Love becomes presence, not performance. Even solitude feels sacred because you no longer feel alone within it. The fragmented mirror has become whole again. Not perfect, not symmetrical, but true. This is what it means to live from the self, to move through the world, knowing that everything you encounter, every joy, every loss, every fear, is part of a single unfolding. You stop chasing final answers and start trusting the rhythm. Enlightenment stops being a destination and becomes an ongoing dialogue with your own depths. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and when that happens, life itself changes texture. Time slows, small things feel vast again. Meaning stops being an idea and becomes a quiet pulse beneath everything, a steady presence guiding each step. The journey doesn't end when you find the self. It begins when you start living from it. As you move forward, imagine the map of the soul, fading slowly into light, its lines, its symbols, its paths dissolving into pure awareness. The journey continues beyond it, endless, unfolding, alive, because once you remember who you are, the search is over, and the living begins.